And the stresses of being in a combat environment, and also having a crisis of faith, because you start to, one of the most common, I don't know how much your listeners want to hear it, but I'll say it anyway. One of the most common reasons why people say God doesn't exist is because they're suffering.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And in this episode, we're going to talk with my new friend, Chris. Chris actually went to West Point, and then after that served in Iraq. And the plan was to be a soldier first, and then afterwards be a chaplain. But things change. You experience different things when you go to Iraq. And you question your faith. It's not a crisis of faith, but it was a question. And those questions about his faith changed the entire trajectory of his life and how he interacts with his families and now his clients when he's looking the arc of an entire client's life. He's a really thoughtful man. This is a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Hey folks, this is Chris, and I wanted to let you know that you can support this episode. If you love these conversations and get something out of them, you can support the show by helping me with the platform fees and technologies that make this show happen. Simply go to buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys. Look, I know it's a long URL, but it works. buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys, just like it sounds. You can donate $1, $5, $3, $10, whatever. You can even make it monthly. And all proceeds go to support the technologies I use to make this show happen. Thank you so much, and enjoy the episode. Well, all right, Chris Pollard, welcome in.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, so tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I live in upstate New York, right where New York starts to turn beautiful, outside of New York City, where the mountains are and the Hudson River. I live with my wife, Elizabeth, and our 2 sons, Nathan and Alex, and we have 2 dogs as well. And for work, I do financial planning.
That sounds to many folks like it's an idyllic life, right? Outside of New York, close enough to get in if you want, far enough away to be a part of the Hudson Valley, family, dogs, etc. I just asked Chris, are there times when you reflect on if there's an alien kind of looking down and seeing your life and seeing this, this life that you had hoped to perhaps put together? Is this what you would imagine? Is this what you would hope it would be?
I'd say where we start in life and where we think we're going to go and where we end up are kind of different places sometimes. And I'd say one of the big things is how you get there. How I've gotten to where I am is very different than the road I thought I would take to get to where I am
That's
today.
Interesting. Now, Did you think that this would be the place you would end up? Like when you were a child in your mind's eye, did you think about that's where you wanted to be? A family life, kind of, in a beautiful natural environment, or is this the vision that you had?
I'd say yes. Like I always knew I wanted to be in a family environment, enjoy nature. Mm-hmm. The specific location I didn't know. When I was little, I thought I wanted to be in the Army and move all over the place, and that's what I did for a little while. But
sure,
I don't know if I had one specific location in mind in particular,
but a vision.
But a vision in general. Yeah, if you were to zoom out, big picture, I'd say married, have some kids, enjoying a career, someplace where it's beautiful. Yeah.
That's the vision. So you'd mentioned just now being in the Army. And so talk to me about that. I've talked to some other folks who have served, and thank you for your service, but I've never talked to someone who actually went through West Point,
Oh, okay.
where you graduated from. So I'm really curious about that. And if you could walk me back to when you were a kid, why did you decide to go to West Point? That's an extremely intentional choice from anybody. It's not like a college that you just go to because it's a safety school,
Right.
or a college that is, affordable, or it's just West Point is there's West Point and then there's everything else except West Point.
Yeah, it's a different way of going to college. Let's put it that way, for
Right.
sure.
So what was the choice?
Yeah, I think I was a very I was looking for kind of an ideal situation. I was a bit of an idealist, I guess. So I was looking for, where can I get the best training to be a good leader? Where can I challenge myself? Where can I do adventurous things, like have a lot of opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise? And West Point came across in the mail one day. I had done reasonably good on my PSATs, and you get the influx of mail from every college that now knows you exist. And then West Point was one of them. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, it's military, it's Army, it's going to be, challenging, and doing that military stuff seemed like it would be fun to do. So seeking a challenge, seeking something that's prestigious to do as well. Like, as a young, when you're 16 years old, I suppose some people would want to do something that's easy, but when I was 16, I was like, well, let me see what I can do to challenge myself and see what level of difficulty I could get to in life, and what kind of adversity I could overcome, and how can I use the things I learned from that to make the world a better place. Like, it's kind of like how I thought growing up. So
that's actually a pretty mature way to think of things. And when you're 16 is not everybody, again, would want to throw themselves into adversity, and then also on top of that to try to make the world a better place or contribute in some place like that. When you were thinking about West Point with friends and family, were they supportive? Were they surprised? Was it in tune or in alignment with who they thought you were? And more importantly, Chris, was it in alignment with who you thought you were?
I would say, from what other people thought of me, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Well, good luck with that. That's cool. Like, that's about the reaction I would get. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say anyone was particularly encouraging of it at first, but nobody was, saying anything negatively against it either. So it was kind of like a neutral, oh, that'd be nice if you could do that, kind of was the reaction. And then, as far as, did I think that's who I was, right? And that kind of, I think as you're forming identity in teenage years, throughout life, really, but particularly in teenage years, you're looking for something bigger than yourself to attach to in some ways, or that somewhat aligns with what you already perceive as a good path, and then what would take that further and improve on it. And I think that's what really appealed to me at the time about going to West Point and doing something that's much more challenging, I'd say, than going to a regular college, which I did for a year too before I went to West Point. So did a regular college for a year and then went to West Point.
Wow. Now, when you got there, I'm sure you were expecting the hierarchy, the discipline, the structure. Was that something that you really embraced and fell into? Didn't you found it really natural and enjoyable?
Sometimes. So I like structure, but I have a very strong independent streak.
Okay.
And I also have a mind that's geared towards improving things. So I have a kind of an engineer's mind. So if I see something that's broken, I'm like, oh, what way could I fix this? And when you approach the military with that frame of mind, they're not particularly interested in your opinions on fixing things or doing anything differently. It's like, you will do what you're told a lot of the time.
Sure.
And we expect you, within the framework of what you're supposed to be doing, to be creative and make choices, but you got to stay in your lane, right? And not
Mm-hmm.
be getting too inventive. So there was a little bit of, um, just being young and saying, well, this is stupid. Why do they do this way? It's like, well, they've been doing it here this way for 200 years. While I was there, it
Right.
was like the bicentennial. It's like, all right, dude, you think you know better than everybody else. It's like, probably not. So they've been doing it a little
Right,
while.
of course.
So
Right. They look at you like, oh, we've heard that before,
yeah,
right? There are a lot of kids come in with a lot of new ideas about how we should be doing things. I guess the one thing that I would assume is that in an environment like that, you make relationships for life.
yeah,
Where you're going through the same kind of experiences, you track each other's career in the military, whether they stay in the military or not.
right.
Is that a fair assessment, a fair assumption to make?
Yes. So in particular, there is the perception that West Pointers always end up in the Army for life. That is not the case simply because the Army has a triangle structure. Some people call it a pyramid structure, but that sounds more like a pyramid scheme, which it is not.
Mm-hmm.
It is a triangle structure. There are fewer slots at the top than at the bottom. So there has to be attrition. You cannot have all the people that started end up having full careers because there's only so many slots for career
Sure.
advancement, period. So everyone knows that a lot of people will get out of the military after a while, and not just because of that narrowing funnel towards being a general or whatever. It's also because people will decide, hey, what I wanted to do when I was 16, 17, deciding where I wanted to go to college, and then the West Point commitment in the 5 years thereafter, things will change along the way of what people want to
Sure.
do. And then but guessing who would stay in and who would leave, not always right. There are some of my classmates are, a couple are full bird colonels now. We don't have any generals yet, but we have, within a couple of years, like 2 years maybe, we probably have our first general officer from the class. But
Wow.
yeah, so everybody is around lieutenant colonel, pinning on colonel, or retiring, because we just hit our 20-year anniversary a year or two ago. So
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Because you wonder, and I guess I'd like to talk with you about that. How did you change? I'm curious where going through West Point, a singular experience that only other West Pointers can understand. Maybe folks in the Naval Academy or Air Force, maybe they can equate. But my hunch is that West Point is such a singular moment in a young person's life that you can only share that with your fellow West Pointers. And I guess I'd ask you, Chris, when you were going through as a certain type of person, and then you serve afterwards, how did you change a little bit so that you decided maybe this wasn't going to be a career, or maybe did you always think it wasn't going to be a career and just a phase of your life?
yeah, I had always thought I would have a military career. What I was going to do in the military was going to be very different, right? So my plans were to start out in the infantry and do the fun side of the Army, which is running around with machine guns blowing stuff up. That's the fun stuff, at least in movies. So you do that and then transition into the Signal Corps, which is like military communications. And then after that, I was planning to go to seminary and become a chaplain. So that was what I was originally thinking about doing. So my career was my orientation was towards that. Start off doing this fun kind of macho man stuff, and then go back in as a chaplain after seminary was the original plan. And then as things unfolded, plans changed. So
did plans change or did you change?
Both, I'd say. So there's part of the maturing process of how do you look at the world and how do you perceive your calling in life and what you're supposed to be doing versus the opportunities that are available to you, your experiences along the way, how different life is than what you think it could be or is, right? So, you go into the Army thinking it's one thing, and then it is what it is at the time, as the expression says. It is what it is. It's like the most nondescript saying. However, sometimes it's fitting when you have to confront the reality of okay, I thought the Army would be like this. I thought I would enjoy it more. But
Mm-hmm.
after a while, I got very tired of someone saying, okay, you're just going to move from here to here on our schedule. We were on the around 2006, I did a tour, combat tour in Iraq. And
Mm.
I saw a lot of people when I got back from Iraq. I went to work on staff at Army Basic Boot Camp, where we train the infantrymen for the Army. And I was doing operations planning there, and we saw people getting recalled that were supposed to be getting out of the military because there was a surge in Iraq, and there was a lot of recall of people that were supposed to be getting out. And I saw
Sure.
my experience in Iraq was not particularly fulfilling. And I think, as we see in hindsight, the United States is not particularly good at regime change. We're good at getting rid of a dictator, but what we do next is a little bit all over the map.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some feelings of futility, I think, that arose from all right, what am I doing here? I'm in a very dangerous environment. The lives of my soldiers are threatened. I got to make these life and death decisions constantly. And what's the end goal of this, and what's the real long-term impact of it? And being on the ground and seeing us attempting to kind of insert American culture on a culture that is so foreign and different to ours that we don't really have a conception of how different it is until you experience it.
Sure.
And deciding, okay, I really don't want to be at where politicians could make decisions and send me to a country where I'm not particularly sure that what we're doing is helpful for the people there. Not saying Saddam Hussein was a good person, but
no,
our end result isn't particularly
earlier,
good either. So,
yeah,
it's a struggle.
Yeah, I think that's a very honest struggle, Chris. I think you had mentioned earlier that while you really appreciated and embraced that structure, you still have an independent streak internally. Yeah. And that would be rubbed against in terms of what you were just talking about, where, if you didn't have control over where your men could go or the types of work that you needed to do or thought you needed to do in Iraq, and that was coming from somewhere else that maybe wasn't in the ground, they didn't quite know the situation. I can see that rubbing you a different way. And, we don't have to talk about your combat experience in Iraq. I don't need to go there, but I do think it was insightful of you to think about the culture clash where, the Iraqi culture is thousands and thousands of years old. The American culture is a couple hundred years old. We've got, as you know, Americans have very specific ideas about how things should be.
Right. And we're willing to tell everyone.
And we want to tell everyone how it should be.
Yes.
And expect them to toe the line of what it should be because, look, this isn't America so great. I get that. And it makes a lot more sense to me now where, as a person who's thoughtful and going into the Army, thinking about how to make the world a better place, I can see you being questioning of your role and the impact you could actually make. And at the same time, bearing that responsibility for the men under your command.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it was somewhat disillusioning. This is not a secret. This is not my opinion. This is actual fact. It's why we replaced certain generals around that time. And then Petraeus came in and did the surge right after I had left, because there wasn't really a strategy at the time. It was trying to get yourselves killed, try not to let the Iraqis kill each other. And that was kind of the strategy, which isn't a strategy, by the way. That's just like a general waving of the hand of, gee, it would be better if people weren't killing each other right now. But the actual strategy was, drive around the countryside and in cities and try to, be a deterrent to the civil war that was essentially brewing there at the time. And it wasn't particularly effective. The surge that happened after was temporarily effective until you leave, and then everybody comes out of the woodwork and does what they want to do. So they have an independent streak too.
So, they have, because they're their own country. I think what's interesting is that that you lived so much of what is now in the history books, right? Where
Yeah.
people look and you know with a quote unquote 2020 hindsight and see, this is how it could have been, should have been, etc. But you actually lived it. Did you find that uh, a priority of yours changed while you were in the midst? As if, I guess what I'm asking is, did the priority of the safety of your men become the most important priority versus other types of considerations that you had in the moment?
Well, it's you're trying to accomplish a mission while still keeping people safe, right? Because in the military and when you're in the infantry, you have to make decisions like, okay, we think there are bad guys over here. We have to drive there. There are probably bombs and landmines in the road on the way there. You got to make the call of how we're going to get there, what we're going to do when we get there, how we engage with the people there, whether or not we perceive them to be enemies. All that kind of stuff becomes very gray and complicated.
Was that your responsibility?
That would be your responsibility if you were the patrol leader, right? So we would do
Right.
much smaller patrols. Occasionally, we would do very large scale operations where we're trying to sweep through a city for um, insurgents and terrorists, basically. But most of the time, it was small level patrols where a group of us would go out, convoy vehicles, and just try to be a presence around there. We were in a little bit more of a rural area outside of Baghdad, so there was just a lot of dirt roads everywhere, farms everywhere, canals everywhere, and you know, going around trying to be a dissuading force while still keeping people safe, but from a threat that wasn't as confrontational as the initial invasion, right? You go in there, there's an enemy there, you shoot at them, you capture them, and there's an enemy you see versus they just put bombs in the road and you hope that you don't get blown up that day is a very different. It's preferable. Most of us that were in the infantry would prefer to be in a firefight and shooting at someone than driving down a road hoping the road doesn't turn into a volcano under you. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So the your preference for, like, you would think you don't want to get in a firefight, but we'd almost rather have that direct conflict, because then there's an enemy you can see and perceive and do something about, versus, gee, that bomb was in front of a person's house, but I don't know if that person put it there, because somebody could just come along with the shovel, throw it in front of their house, and then leave. So the ambiguity of it was quite challenging to deal with. And, you're trying to keep the Iraqi people safe, but you don't know who's a good guy and who's a bad guy, right? And then keep your own people safe, and trying to just deal with the uncertainty all the time was, I'd say it's complex, but it's more like a problem that you don't, it felt like a lot more randomness than one would hope to, you're rolling the dice every day. It's not like, oh, there's a bunch of people in a bunker over there, we got to go take them out of the bunker or something, like.
And we can create a plan for that.
Right. You can create a plan for that instead of like, oh, let's see what happens today when we go drive around, which was much more of what, and that was the strategy, right? And I'm just like, this isn't a strategy. I mean, I didn't know what to do either. Like, I'm not I never won a Nobel Prize or anything. So if you ask me what to do there, I was like, well, we have to go and talk to people and be out amongst the locals, which we did. Other than that, folks have to decide for themselves whether they want to live in a peaceful environment, and can they come to terms within their society in a sustainable way. And I think at the time they didn't, and we'll see how Iraq plays out still. But
yeah, that's an incredible experience where you just mentioned the uncertainty of it, the randomness of it, the ambiguity of it. And in the beginning of our conversation, I mean, we've only known each other for 20 minutes, but at the beginning of the conversation, you said you like to fix things. Well, Chris, I don't know how you fix that.
Yeah, no, not a whole lot of that. Yeah.
Right. I don't know how you wrap your head around that. And I can absolutely see you then saying, gosh, this isn't the life plan. Right. What I'm really curious about, though, is that, earlier you had mentioned perhaps going to seminary, which is another intentional choice, specific, with, roles and duties that wrap around faith, that wrap around comfort, that wrap around being, an advisor, a consultant, not only of the body, but also of the spirit. Did you think about that in those moments, or were you like, man, I just got to get out of Dodge. I got to be done with this?
That is really what it started to turn into. Was I had the ambiguity of, that position and the stresses of being in a combat environment, and also having a crisis of faith, because you start to, one of the most common, I don't know how much your listeners want to hear it, but I'll say it anyway. One of the most common reasons why people say God doesn't exist is because they're suffering. So as someone that has faith, you'd say, well, I'm hoping that I can see God do something either through me or around me that would be alleviate the suffering that I see here in Iraq. And when you don't see it head in a particular direction that you could perceive, that's a pretty severe challenge to faith, right? Because you're
Sure.
hoping that something could come through, right? And that it would make an impact. And you see the suffering, like when people say that the United States is a capitalist hellscape, or they say comments like that, I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because if you go to these places, where I walked into a farmer's house area one day, and I was pointing to a structure that they had built out of mud and straw, and I was like, oh, is that your chicken coop? Because we were always like, keep an eye on what structures were around to see if people would be hiding weapons and stuff there. And he's like, oh no, that's the house for the day laborers. And it was like 3 to 4 feet tall and with a sloped roof, and they would just hire day laborers from other towns and then just put them in a mud hut, and no electricity, no running water, no no facilities to use the bathroom, right? And you're just like, this is normal life for folks. And it's like 110 degrees, and they're like farming and stuff. Like,
and it's the year 2000.
Yeah, and this is 2006. So
it's 2006, yeah. Right? I mean,
so you see like how folks live and in conditions, and what we don't have the best governance system, but it seems to be the least worst one. So when people kind of give up on that, it's I get a little frustrated. But going back to the whole faith thing, like when you have your faith challenged in a very challenging environment, and then you say, look, I'd love to be providing spiritual guidance and emotional guidance to soldiers, but then you feel like you don't have that's gone for yourself. It's like, man,
wow.
I know I don't know what I want to do next, but it's not this related to this.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back.
And it was almost
related to it at all.
Yeah,
absolutely. I can see how you would completely turn away 100% from it altogether and be like, the entire structure is something, the entire organization is something that I need to remove myself from.
Yeah.
In a crisis of faith, I think at those moments, at those combat moments or the suffering moments, that's when you're really tested, right? And I spoke with a man whose father was in World War II. And I asked him about his father's faith, and he said, that's where it was really tested. He said, that's where my dad was really tested, right? My dad was tested in the foxhole.
Yeah.
Right? Does God exist?
Right.
Right. Does God exist for me? Does God exist for my friend in the foxhole who's right next to me? How does it actually play out if he's praying to God that he lives and I'm praying to God that I live, and one of us doesn't live? Right. What does that mean about my prayer, right? Are those heard? Are those answered? And, those are the most important questions and the most challenging questions to ask, right? And they really go down deep and help you figure out what your faith really is. Out of that moment, Chris, I'm curious, how did your faith change, and how has your faith journey changed from that experience?
Yeah. So at first, it was very frustrating, because you kind of, it's almost like feeling like a sense of loss. Like, okay, this faith thing that, because especially if you're raised in a religious home from a young age, I think we inculcate values with the mind of a child because they were taught to us as a child. And those the values and the faith is given the opportunity to grow up, but the means it's given to do so is very unpleasant, which is through challenge, right? So, one of the visuals I think that best explains what this felt like for me was it's kind of like a tree whose roots is like seeking water. Like we're trying to find that faith connection again, but it just isn't there. And the deeper you push and the harder you push, it's just not, it feels like you're pushing against or into rock. But something that I'm journeying through. This isn't like you choose to believe or you choose not to believe, and it's an on or off thing. It's more about where am I at with my faith today. Is
where
probably a better approach.
Yeah.
But it's
now. Were you Catholic? I'm assuming you're a Christian.
Christian, yes, yeah.
A Catholic or Protestant? Or
Protestant, like kind of non-denominational or evangelical leaning Protestant. Yeah.
Okay. So where are you in your faith journey today?
Yeah. So where I am in my faith journey is faith is still very important to me and central to my life and how I think about the world and engage with other people. It's shifted a little more from how can I make the world a better place to seeing the world as God's kingdom, and God's king, he's just not fully in charge yet, right? And it's gradually happening, and he expects all of us to do the right thing and bring about his kingdom. And then as Christians, we believe Jesus is coming back, right? It's kind of a trope now, even with like Left Behind movies and stuff like that. But it's really about, okay, how are we engaging as citizens of God's kingdom on the earth and making the world a better place in everyday decisions, not necessarily, you don't have to be a priest or a chaplain or a missionary or something like that to make the world a better place. A lot of this is, if I acted like God was really king and that what he thought was important to me and what I do is important to him, how would I live my life? Right. Sure. And that's how I think about it. A little less about do I believe or not. I think in the Western world, after the Protestant Reformation, we became very obsessed, particularly in America, with if you believe the right thing, you're okay. I'd say the things you believe influence your behavior, and that's why it's important to believe the right thing. But simply believing something, i.e. assenting to a set of intellectual assertions, is not faith, right? Just agreeing to a list of things is not faith. What the actions you take every day, which is taking beliefs and making them action, which brings about good in the world and thriving for people, I think that's the fundamental message and reasoning behind faith. So that's where I'm at with it. And then some days I'm like, there are some days where I'm like, I don't know if any of that faith stuff is real or not. But kind of there is a point at which like wrestling with real or not real is a little bit more like a child wrestling with, is Santa real or not? Or do we believe in the Christmas spirit? We make Christmas super enjoyable for everyone. Like,
sure.
I'm not sure we need to sit around debating the realness of Santa when we should be giving gifts.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you don't, it's funny because we don't debate the realness of Santa as more important than the holiday spirit.
Correct.
Right. That it invokes, right. And the time and the place. And I'm curious where, as you started to question your faith, and, turn away from the seminary and say, well, I have to actually figure myself out before I can even counsel or help other people. Are you still involved actively in a church now? And is it something that your family is a part of? The reason I ask is, some families all go to church together. Yep. Some families don't. Some families, a mom might go to church and the dad and kids don't, vice versa. When we grew up, My mom was Lutheran, so we would go to Lutheran church. My dad didn't pay attention to it, and they were divorced. So when I was with my mom, we'd go to church. When I was with my dad, I didn't go to church.
Yep.
As we raised our family, we did not attend a church regularly. And I'm curious now with you, especially as you kind of went through your own and are still going through your faith journey. How do you talk about that with your family now?
Um, I, for a long time, I was very closed in about it, and I felt it was um, important to not inflict my struggles on other people. Right. So there's a fine, particularly with my children, is a fine line between being open and honest and then creating an unhealthy relationship where you overshare with your kids and put burdens on them that they're not really ready to kind of handle at the time. Right. Like,
of course,
we saw, things in Iraq and things people did where you're like, wow, that's pretty evil. Like, maybe God should do something about it. And then struggling with that, probably not appropriate to talk to someone at a young age about. Now that my sons are 17 and 18, we're getting to that phase where they can kind of developmentally start to think about those kinds of things, right? So,
was it a challenge for you to keep some of that in? Did you have anybody to talk to about your experience to help process some of the things that you've seen?
Some yes, some no. I think some of my background, like I said, when you receive some religious messages as a child and you interpret them as a child, they kind of stick around at the childish level. So it's like, well, you have to believe the right thing. So if you're not believing the right thing, then you're in a bad place, right? So that's kind of the internal struggle. And then not feeling like I could share that with anyone, because then you would have the horror, you don't believe, right? So and then people get concerned for you.
The judgment,
yes.
Right? The judgment of you.
There's often the responses that I would be afraid of, not that people would even respond this way, would be either fear, like, oh my God, you're going to go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus anymore, right? There's that that response that some people get, because for them, it's very important that, people believe that the way they do. And then for other people, it's the judgment of, well, if you would just read these books, the apologists say this and it explains it. And, after a while of reading tons and tons of books on philosophy and whether God's real or not, after a while, it just becomes like, doesn't help anymore. Right. Because that's not the fundamental issue isn't, explain to me why God is real. Right. It's not like an explanation intellectual thing. But there's a component of that, right, to it. There's, I think my faith has become more holistic in that there's an intellectual component, there's an experiential component, an emotional component. Like, it's a whole person, not just fully experiential or only intellectual, that, these philosophers, it's basically like philosophy that's centered around God rather than a different philosophical school of thought.
That makes sense to me. It does, Chris. I think that and I've said this before, so for listeners of the show, forgive the redundancy, but I think that there's a difference between, there's a religion, there's a church, and there's faith. Religion is global. There's Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, blah, blah, blah. Church is local, it's community, right? Yeah. There's Stella Maris down in San Diego. There's East Liberty Lutheran Church in Pittsburgh. There's Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill. And that's where you meet people of local areas. Maybe there's a culture that you like for that church, which is different than another church.
Yeah.
And then there's faith, which to me is very private. It's very solitary, right? You have your own relationship with whatever you want to choose to call God. Some people choose to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Some people choose to have, to talk to Allah. Some people want to read the Torah. Some people pray to bodhisattvas, or the like. But there's an individual relationship. And what I'm always curious about other people's faith journeys and what spawns those, right? how the path unfolds for them.
Yeah.
Right. And for you, it was so interesting that your experiences in Iraq, which were through your choices earlier to go to West Point, to be in the Army, to do some good, had a real impact on the rest of your life and the rest of your life's faith journey.
Right. Yeah.
In some ways, it's to be expected, right? You would hope that there's like a meaningful experience that you have and that it changes you, and you come out of the wilderness of your service and you are changed man.
Yeah. Right. And then I'd say one of the issues though has been the extension of the wilderness, right? Like if we're going to use the wilderness story, the wilderness was like until a generation died, right? It was like until it was 40 years wandering around the wilderness. Like that's a long time to be wandering around a place where there's not a lot of food and water and kind of going in a circle. And that's sometimes I felt that, right? And I think a lot of people feel that in life, the mundaneness of it at times, right? Where you're just, I'm doing the same thing every day and I'd like to make things better and I'll try to optimize, right? Try to do all this optimizing stuff that everybody's talking about, these protocols or whatever. Like sometimes you just got to wander through the wilderness a little bit until it's time to cross into something else. And sometimes that's on your timetable and sometimes it's not.
Right.
And being okay with it either way.
Right. And there are times when transitions are thrust upon us by forces we can't control.
Yeah.
There are times when we push ourselves into a transition. I think that there are times in life where, you know, there aren't too many changes, right? And that's okay too. I think that eventually, you know, the natural law states that nothing will stay the same, that whatever's going on right now will be different in some way, somehow.
Yeah.
It's just a question of how you reflect on it. You know, so your boys are now 18, 19, they're on the cusp of manhood and they're kind of moving along. Do you feel more comfortable having these kinds of conversations with them in terms of your faith journey, in terms of some of the struggles you had with what you saw as, I'm sure at times, questioning the goodness of humanity, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you can have those conversations with them as they start creating their own perceptions of the world?
Yes. So, and in very different ways. So one of my sons is very thoughtful and likes to think deeply about things. My other son has autism, so his thought patterns are not like other people's thought patterns, right?
Just different, neurodivergent.
Yep. So, and then he has OCD, and one of his obsessions will tend towards, it's called scrupulosity. It's basically perseverating on religious themes, right? That will be one of his. So sometimes I'll see him struggling with things that I've struggled with, but for a different reason. You know, it's because his brain just gets latched onto that particular issue. And usually it's related to some kind of uncertainty or, you know, trying to figure out what makes him okay, what makes the world an okay place, what is expected of him. Like trying to figure all those things out with a neurodivergent brain is, I don't know if it's harder or easier than someone that has whatever a regular brain means. But we're all trying to figure it out. I'm just hoping that for him that he doesn't get so hung up on the OCD side of things. But man, if I just figured this one thing out, everything would be okay, which is the core of OCD, which is if I can control one thing, it would take care of uncertainty. And that's not how it works, right?
You mean there's more uncertainty in the world?
Yeah, you think?
Beyond that one thing?
If I could wash my hands, right, then I wouldn't get sick. And I just focus on washing my hands over and over. And then it won't deal with the fact of, oh, I'm, 17 years old now. I don't know what to do with myself, right? And I'm about to leave home maybe, or whatever it is. So those kinds of obsessions can not just be classical hand washing OCD. It can be, oh, does God love me? Am I good enough? Right. Could I ever be good enough? Could God forgive everybody?
What makes a good person?
Yeah, what makes a good person? Is this even good? And then getting so obsessed with figuring out what's good and what isn't, that you just don't do anything good anyway.
Sure, you're paralyzed.
It's the irony.
Right? Yeah, that must be a challenge. And I think that especially as someone who naturally wants to fix things, I'm sure that must be very challenging for you, where you just might maybe want to fix things, and you're maybe a lesson. I don't know. Maybe you're learning how to cope with not fixing things.
Yes. And more about, and more, I'd say one of the things I've learned from about faith and life in general is life and faith are more organic and less mechanical. It's a lot.
Oh,
You don't fix a tree. You know what I mean? Like if a limb falls off, you can like, of a tree, like a branch breaks, maybe you cut it a little bit, maybe you put some like tar or whatever to help protect the tree, but you got to let the tree like do some growing and get through a winter season and then shed the leaves, and then grow back in the spring, like to heal and grow. Mm-hmm. It's more of a growth thing, which is organic, living, breathing, interacts with the environment and nature around it, right. Communally connected, less of it's a watch and I need to fix this broken cog. If only it were that easy, right? So
right. Yeah. And I think one of the things that that a lot of people struggle with is that life in the world itself is a complicated organism.
Yeah.
The world is a very complicated organism. Bees are flying around, going into lavender, and funny, but I shouldn't say funny, but small example is we had an orange tree in our backyard. So I live in San Diego. It's a temperate climate. You have orange trees. Nothing doing with this orange tree. We planted it, had some green leaves, no fruit, just nothing doing. And we eventually, just through happenstance, put some lavender in the other areas around. And what I did not expect is that the lavenders brought the bees. What I did not expect is that the bees would make the orange tree blossom.
Yeah.
And 1 year after we planted the lavender, the orange tree flourished. And suddenly the next year it was fruit was crazy. And now it's just incredible health. It's an incredibly healthy orange tree with 30 to 100 oranges all the time. It was only because of the bees. And I'm like, man, that small little thing that I didn't even think about, to me, is so beautiful about the complicated nature of the world.
Right.
And you just mentioned the organic connection between trying to fix things and overcoming an adaptability. If that's how a tree operates, if a limb breaks, well, isn't that even more manifest and more complicated in people?
Yeah.
Right. So your son now is trying to navigate a very complicated world. And when you start thinking about the goodness of humanity, virtue, does God exist? If God exists, is God a good God? If God exists, is he speaking to me? Do I hear him? Am I not hearing him? Why should I get into this place where it can be all consuming and obsession and obsessive. And it's interesting to me because you mentioned as you transitioned in your career, as you came back to the Army, now you're in financial planning. And financial planning to me has this blend of organic quality, but also real structure and fixing, right?
Yes.
There's no ambiguity in the numbers of an investment, right? There's none. The number is this or it's that.
Right.
Do you find that was such an interesting draw for you because of the clarity that happens and also some of the ambiguity of figuring out what investments might work or not and how people are different?
Yeah. So one of the main things when I was thinking, okay, I'm getting out of the Army, what am I going to do next? What do I like? And it's like, I like numbers, I like figuring things out, and I like helping people and working with people. Mm-hmm. And I'd seen people, friends, family make some interesting financial decisions, let's say, that had long-term impacts, and say, well, what if we could give them guidance and they would make good decisions and wouldn't have to suffer as much and struggle with these finances, and what makes someone financially successful versus non-successful. Figuring all that was very interesting to me. So then I started doing financial planning, and then I've kind of evolved into there's a school of thought within financial planning, if that's called financial life planning, which says the most important thing we do with clients is help them figure out, or if they already have it figured out, express what they want to do with their life. And then we line up financial resources so it happens. So it always starts with, what do you want to do with yourself, and how is that going to change over time? So hearing much more about the client's interests, and not just like, oh, I want to retire at XYZ date, well, if you were to retire, why do you want to stop working? Like clients will come to me and be like, I want to retire at 50, or, if they're younger. And I'll say, well, why would you want to stop working at 50? Why not 52? And if you ask an asinine question like that, then say, well, what I really don't like is my work schedule now because I can't spend as much time with my kids. And then it's saying, well, you don't want to retire. You just really want to spend time with your kids. So what can we do to make that happen? Oh, I might have to shift careers. Okay, that's going to affect your salary. And now we can figure it out, right?
Now you can start planning.
Yes.
So to me, I think that's interesting, and forgive me if this lands wrong. And if it does, I don't mean to trespass, Chris. But in the military, as you were thinking about being in seminary, we're helping soldiers and helping folks kind of guide their spiritual paths. It seems to me you're doing the same thing, only instead of doing it for someone's spiritual path, you're doing it for their life path and their financial path.
Yes.
Right. It's the same desire to help somebody, but there's a whole lot less ambiguity and I don't know, a whole lot less wrangling with the spiritual questions when you can focus an attention on finances, right?
It's in some ways, yes. And in other ways, the more it's kind of like the more experienced a financial planner is, the more they know that life is highly ambiguous. And there is a lot of false precision in financial planning. And what I mean by that is you can kind of know based on experience when you work with, hundreds of clients after a while. I was telling a client this the other day, you start to piece together the entire human life cycle and see what do people experience in this life cycle? How do they transition to the next? What happens within it? Like going from, just newly married to now we have a kid and then we're buying our first home. Like the life story and life arc of a human, and how does that interact with finances, but also how do they think about themselves? How do they think about money? How do they develop? You start to see that in a weird way without having experienced it yourself, because I work with 90-year-olds and I've worked with, kids in high school that are like, I think I want to go to college and how am I going to pay for that? And the parents will bring their kids in and we'll talk about it. Right. So you start to piece together this whole thing and then you can bring it to a client and you say, wow, most of these people, if you ask them about their life journey, they're not exactly where they thought they would be. They're in the vicinity of where they probably wanted to be if things went well. Right. And based on their decisions and the environment around them as well. So you kind of get an idea of what tends to work well. And this kind of goes to the concept of wisdom, is like, how do you live life skillfully? And then doing that particularly with finances so that you can have a meaningful life and spend time with your kids if that's what you want to do, or grandkids, right? So,
but there's comfort.
There's a range of outcomes
that most people. Yeah, it gives you a perspective most people don't have, Chris, because, like you said, you get to see everybody in these various stages. Where, I mean, I remember being in the stage where we first, came into this house. My daughter was less than 1, and we had another child as soon as we moved in here. And your mindset is all about what's happening right now. And you try to think about planning. But man, I tell you, and you know this, when your kids are 1 and 3 years old, you imagine what it could be like for them to be high schoolers or young adulters, but you have no idea what that's like or how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm worried about diapers right now. I'm not even thinking about kindergarten. And then you're a kindergarten, you're like, oh my God, we got to get them ready for first grade. Right. It's such an in the moment type of thing. And yet you're able to step back and see that, like you said, this arc of these lives. What have you learned generally about these arcs? And are there some themes that you can see that persist from person after person, even though every life is different? Are there these general phases that you've seen?
Yeah. So I'd say some persistent themes are that humans are constantly changing throughout life. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think in the United States we have not the greatest divorce rates, right? So we think the person we are now is going to be the person we'll always be, and that the person we married will always be the same person. And you will both be different people in the future. And can we work together to make it work out okay, right? So that's a constant theme, that people that were able to stay together with their spouse, which is a pretty significant thing to be able to do, um, particularly financially, because the quickest way to lose half your money is to get divorced, right? So you actually
Right.
lose more than half because you have to pay a lawyer to lose half of it. So it gets worse.
Sounds like you've had that conversation with some of your
Yes,
clients.
a couple times. Yeah. So as we look at these arcs and themes and phases, you kind of have the I'm coming into myself. I'm coming out of college, like into my first job. Do I even like this? Should I switch to something else? And then you meet a life partner maybe later and start to do a committed relationship. And then you start to decide, do I add to the family or not? Right. And where are we going to live? Who will we be near? Can I tolerate my own parents? Right. Now that I'm an adult and they might not think I'm an adult, right? Or they don't know how to interact with my kids, or all these things that people have to deal with that are the stuff of sitcoms. But this is real life that we all have to like sort through. And it's just very interesting. We start with an exercise where we ask people in different facets of your life, what would make this ideal? And start planning from that. Like, don't even talk numbers yet. Just say, hey, if we're interacting with your family, and it goes to all these different either key transition points in people's lives between phases, or what are those big decisions within phases that they're facing. And then how can we say, all right, if this was going well for you, how do you define what's going well? And we have the spouses do them separately. And often they won't share it until the meeting, and it can be really fun. Most of the time it's fun and good. Sometimes it can be a little awkward if people are like, what? But starting with that perspective and those different facets gives people the opportunity to talk about how they might want their life to go. And the couples that seem the happiest together don't talk about their answers. And when they come together, their answers are like congruent, right, to each other.
They're simpatico, right?
Yeah,
right.
it's just like
they're thinking the same.
They've grown together, even, it's like two trees near each other that are mutually supporting each other kind of thing.
Sure. That's a beautiful analogy. It's very poetic. And, you hope that as you change, and because everybody's going to change, both spouses change throughout their lives. You just hope that as they change, they're changing in ways that are complementary. Because we don't live in isolation. We change comparatively. We get influenced by our spouse and our partner, right? And we influence each other. And I think what's interesting about your work now is you get to talk about their life phases, but I'm sure you also get to talk about the emotions of money. We had a conversation with a gentleman named Aaron Kirsch, and we talked about relationship of like we have relationships with money and emotional attachments. Do you find that now that you become a planner and kind of your vocation is wrapped around advising and consulting, I wouldn't say it's life therapy, but I'm sure that you listen to a lot of people. Has your relationship with money changed in terms of how you feel about it?
Yes, in some ways. In other ways, there's things that are kind of stuck, right? Where it's kind of, I call them money personalities. It's like, are you a hoarder where you just hoard money, right? And you're just like, my objective in life is to just be like a pirate. I need to collect treasure and sit on it,
and like Smog the Dragon. I'm going to sit on a bunch of golden coins and do nothing but sit on it.
Yes, nothing but sit on it, right? No enjoyment necessary. So, right. Or I'd say one of my parts of my money personality is called sporadic splurging, where I save money like crazy and then I restrict myself from spending it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm just going to spend some money now. And then it's like you go like blow a large amount of money all at once because you just like saved it all. And then you're like, I'm going to go buy a building, right? Which I did recently, but like I saved to do it and I planned, but there's that like restrictive and then almost like explosive aspect that I'm like trying to just level out. Right. So that's my money personality. I work a lot with clients who are what I call over accumulators. They just like they like to save money, or they're nervous dispositionally, or because of how their family talked about money. So they just save a lot of it and invest a lot of it. And then they just accumulate large amounts of money. And then they struggle to spend it. So then you'll see somebody with like millions and millions of dollars hesitating to like replace a basic piece of furniture in your house. Right. So, but they'll go drop 6 figures on kids' college, no problem. But if you were to say, hey, for yourself, are you okay with replacing that chair or that dresser or whatever? They're like, no. And then they struggle with it and perseverate on it almost. So
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of very interesting interactions
That
with
is
money.
interesting because that kind of goes to self-worth, right? I'm absolutely happy to spend my money on my children or my grandchildren or nieces or nephews so they have education, but maybe I don't deserve to spend money on myself, or maybe it's going to be, or I'm not worth it, or
Yeah.
maybe it's going to lead down a path of vice or some type of thing. But it's a funny thing because the relationships we have with money really, I think, inform a lot of time the relationship we have with the world.
Yes.
Right? Whether there's an abundant mentality or a scarcity mentality,
Yeah.
whether you can find that right balance. Does that ring true? Did you see that play out with people?
Yes. And uh, sometimes I've asked the question a few times. I find this helpful to say, was there ever a time where you felt secure about money or okay, like that you weren't about to run out of money? Like, tell me about a time in the past when you felt okay with money. And some people they don't have a time that they've ever felt positively,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
And then you see that persistent, it just kind of sticks around for them. And then other people say, well, I felt good in this because I just didn't have I didn't have kids at the time and I didn't have to worry about them and I would have made it work. And then what we try to do is build on that and say, all right, if you would have made it work then, do you think you could make it work now? Like if you spend a little bit extra money on yourself and you let yourself do that, and then we accidentally spend just a little too much money, would you make some adaptations so that you don't run out? Like, would that be
Right.
super challenging for you, or like, would you be okay with, a small change of some type? Because we're not talking about you're going and buying 6 houses. We're talking about buying a dresser here, right,
Right.
or a chair, right? So let's put it in a
Right.
little context. So I don't know if you
That's
want me to circle back
interesting.
to your original question, but I just
Well,
want to
no,
kind of
no, that I think that was great. You answered it's just a conversation. I
yeah
think it's fascinating that you have this peek into life, and I think that also too, Chris, you have um, what I would believe to be a much different perspective, where you've experienced being with people who live in a straw and mud hut as a day laborer in 115-degree temperature, and that's how they're living. Versus people, in Westchester County or north of New York who have
yeah
millions of dollars in the bank and are struggling to buy a dresser.
yeah
Right? The spectrum of the human condition, the human experiences that you've seen, I think is very unique and interesting, and I can see why if you're talking to somebody here, and it's an overused cliche, but that's why it is. They really have first world problems, right? The
yes
first world problem of how can I spend all this money, right?
yep
That is more than I'll ever need in my
right
life, right?
yep
Boy, is that a first world problem.
yes
And I imagine though that what I love about your journey is maybe this is an expression of your faith journey. Maybe this is how you express your faith journey and your seminary tendencies by being this advisor that advises on something that's so important in people's lives, but is also very abstract. I mean, money is a number. Usually translates into things, but it's uh, the guy who wrote *Sapiens*. I forget
yes
his name,
yeah
but you know what I'm talking about.
yes great book yeah
Where he said the one thing that all humans now in all cultures right now believe in, we all believe in money. We
yeah
believe what money means,
yep
right? So in some way, that's, I think, beautiful that you're working with people based on things that they really believe in.
yeah and it's so curious to see, like, there is a certain amount of shame to being poor, right? There's also a certain amount of shame to being wealthy. So people will try to hide it. Not They'll go and buy cheap cars because they don't want people to judge them, even though that car, in proportion to their net worth, is equivalent to buying a scooter, right? A normal person
Mm.
buying a scooter, where like a middle class American be like, a scooter is like, get a really fancy scooter for like $300 for the kids. It's like, that's fancy. Like a guy buying a Porsche has and they've got millions and millions of dollars. It's like equivalent to a scooter for them, but they struggle with the guilt of that. And then there is a lot culturally, it is always fun to, like with White Lotus, right? We want to like, what's the best way to say it without expletive? You want to crap on rich people, right? So, like how can we say, it's all rich people are evil and all these kinds of tropes, that there are good and evil rich people, just like there are good and evil poor people and good and evil middle class people. Sure. And I think we need to, as we think about other humans and how they interact with money, I've approached the person compassionately, right? And then just see like, okay, money solves certain problems, but it doesn't solve others, and it even creates others, right?
Sure.
So looking at compassion with somebody, as you see, I've seen people with biggest client debt problem I had was a client bought some land for like $1 million, right, in like 2006 on the coast of Florida, and then it crashed in value to like 90,000 or something.
Oh wow!
And I think they owed the money on it too. It was done with like leverage or something. And I was like, so are they like coming after you for the money? And they're like, they're too busy right now because the whole country's real estate had collapsed. But I'm like, you're in the whole 900,000 on an asset that has no value. Like, this is bad. And they're like,
right.
Yeah, but they're not asking for it now. I'm like, how are you so calm about this? So,
but it's interesting because that's the thing. Like I knew a guy growing up. He was the father of a good friend of mine. And he was telling me about all these businesses he had. He go, I got this spot thing here. I've got this thing here. I got 10,000 here, but I owe 15 here, but I'm going to get 10 over here. And he was just talking about all this stuff. And my head was swimming just listening to him.
Yeah. And
I realized at that point that to me, and this is where, I could understand the relationship I have with money. I didn't feel comfortable in that environment.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel comfortable in that environment. And even when I graduated school, I started to do freelance, and I was not comfortable in that environment, right? The gig economy, I'm going to do this job and then I'll do that job. And yes, there's freedom and it's interesting and it's cool. But the uncertainty and the lack of stability was something that I realized that fundamentally not uncomfortable in the way that, oh yeah, you should thrive in discomfort. I was like, no, I was suffering in that discomfort.
Yeah,
I was anxious in that discomfort.
Right.
So what I needed was a steady job.
Yep.
I needed that paycheck that's every other week. And so where some people have an entrepreneurial spirit and they want to work for themselves and they want to go out and risk it, I realized pretty early on, I just don't think that's me, right? I just don't think that discomfort is good for me, and that's what I want, how I want to live my life. And it gets to about what you just talked about, where how do you want to live your life? And now let's do a financial plan based on how you want to live your life. What have you learned about yourself after meeting and talking with all these different people?
I think as I've approached like my 40s, you start to your perspective changes a little bit, the midlife thing, I guess they call it. But I feel like I can generalize and learn a little bit better now from seeing what clients have experienced. So when I see a client, because I've helped multiple clients, like kids transition from high school into selecting a college and then paying for it, and then them getting launched into careers. So I've seen that, but now my kids are doing it. So it's like I kind of have practice vicariously through a client, but they're my own. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool to get like, you say, okay, this is a phase, and I know that I'm probably, I've seen like 5 clients say this about their kids transitioning into college, and then seeing how parents thinking about their own kids change as their kids mature. And if there's a healthy relationship there, the parents thinking about their child matures with their child, right? So they no
Sure.
longer think about them as a little baby, or they might like
Right.
emotionally sometimes, like, oh, that's my baby, but they don't. Eventually, they start to transition like that. You're the next generation, and I
Right.
trust you with money now. And there's all kinds of really cool things just to see people grow themselves. So I've learned a lot from watching clients, like as I go through certain phases, like, okay, if kids are picking colleges now, right, or and applying for things and trying to think
Mm-hmm.
about careers, what have I seen other clients experience and their kids do? Because I've heard like it's not just parents kind of bragging which colleges their kids are applying to. It's more of the struggle side of my kids applied to these colleges. I don't know what they're going to get into. This one is for this and they cost that, but I don't know if they should even major in music because I don't know if they could support themselves. Like
Right. Right.
hearing that
Right. Of
from
course.
clients, right? And then going through it myself, it gives you um it can help me like regulate a little bit better myself,
Of course. Of
um
course. Of
because it
course. Yeah.
a
That
lot
makes a lot of
a
sense.
lot of what we want to find like a magic bullet or like the one thing that if I knew that earlier it would have made my whole life better. A lot of them are like broad uh observations of sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you have to let things develop, right? And interests develop, right? Or if your child's interested in a particular school, right? Other times you have to nip things in the bud before they get out of control. Like my kid's going to go to the
Mm-hmm.
most expensive college in the universe to study like watching paint dry, like not even painting, just
Right.
watching it dry. It's like, okay, maybe we should talk about that. What's
Right. You
interesting
talk
about
about
that to
that
you?
early on.
Yeah.
Yeah. A friend of mine, his daughter went to Amherst
Yep.
as a literature major specializing in poetry. I don't know if you know anything about Amherst, but it's probably the most expensive school in the entire
The
country.
most expensive
Uh,
party school in the country too.
well,
So
I mean, that's a big ask,
yeah.
right, for that kind of major at that kind of school, and we can go a whole rabbit hole about that. But you're right, you get to learn and get to figure it out. And I'll be curious, to talk with you or meet you some way somehow 10, 15 years from now to see what you've learned as you start moving on in your life.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and
Quick,
it's
go
interesting
ahead.
to see them experience it and you experience it just with on your own path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, on your own path.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Golden Knot. Is that a book that you wrote?
Yes. Yeah, that's a book we've kind of been talking about it. You brought it up where it's like, well, what was that thing in me that wanted to make me a chaplain, right? And it's like there's
Mm-hmm.
that golden thread in my life of helping people figure out problems, solve some problems, but also be with people and not just try to automatically fix it, right? So there's a mix
Hmm.
of being with someone and letting them grow and it be more organic and fixing what you can. So untangling the golden knot is about why people that have more than enough money still worry about it and can you do something about it? So one of the things that we did when I was writing the book is we look through client notes going back years and say, what do clients worry about all the time? And they always are asking us about. And I just said, okay, these are the top things that people worry about when they're about to transition into retirement, because that's kind of my specialty is people are about to
Mm-hmm.
retire. They're going to jump off the cliff. What's next for me? Right. So what do they always worry about? And what are consistent, persistent worries that kind of keep lagging? And if there have been ways that we've been able to help clients, what are the ways that seem to work the most commonly, or what are some different approaches that we can take? So it's very like solutions focused while being open enough to let people explore. So each chapter is super short. It's a story from a client, like, the client is struggling to buy furniture for their house, even though they have millions of dollars, right? And then it says, what about you? How do you think about this? And then it lets you write down. So it's almost like
Little
journaling a little
prompts.
bit. And
Mm-hmm.
then it also have exercises of, okay, if you were to retire, what are you retiring to? Are you just running from your job? Or are you retiring to something, right?
I
Plan out a
like it.
week. What are some things you want to do? Put on index cards, organize your week, right? So all kinds of exercises. I want it to be super practical because there's a lot of books written about retirement planning. We don't need another one, but a lot of people do need the why am I so nervous? You told me the numbers are good. Why can't I do it? I mean, you know, so it's a
I love it.
yeah.
that's another way to help, and
Yep.
that way it scales out for more people than you could meet personally face to face. You can extend that help towards others. That's fantastic.
Yep.
Congratulations on the book.
Thanks. Yeah, the reason why I wrote it was because I can only work with so many people myself. And we had a book review that I just saw today, and part of it was, and I do this all myself, and I did the exercises, and the main thing, he brought up the plan 2 weeks in retirement and try it out. I was like, oh, thank God people are doing it. It's great.
That's awesome. It worked.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fantastic, Chris. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
So I do have one final question for you. Who is someone that you know that I don't know, but that I should know?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. Sorry. I don't know if I totally prepped for that one. So, can you help me narrow that down? Is there anyone in particular?
Someone, based on our conversation, who's someone that you think I should meet?
Oh, do they have to be a man?
No.
Oh, okay. So you can interview. Okay, I just didn't know the Menfolk's Journey.
Well, not for my podcast, just to meet. In fact, one of the guys that I talked to, he says, "Man, Chris, I'd really like you to meet my mom."
Yeah.
I was like, I'd love to meet your mom. She's 87 years old and just thriving and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just curious, who is someone that you would be like, oh, I'd love you to meet this person?
Oh, the first person that comes to mind for me is my business mentor and also my personal mentor, Elizabeth Jatan, who was one of the, she became a stockbroker and financial advisor in the 80s. And you can imagine being a woman doing that in the 80s. Wolf of Wall Street was not far from the truth,
Right.
So she kind of had that kind of stuff, but she was one of the forerunners of this financial life planning group, which really focuses on how do people develop throughout their lifespan and think about their relationship with money, but also of aging, and not just thinking about, okay, I'm a young person, then all of a sudden I retire and then I die. It's I'm a young person, I'm a middle-aged person, and then I'm at this early part of retirement and then this mid part. And then what am I doing throughout these different phases of life? She's super fascinating to talk about these kinds of topics. So if you seem very interested in that kind of stuff from our discussion. So she's a great person to talk to about that kind of stuff, very well spoken. And she's been a mentor of mine for, 15 years now. So
wonderful.
Very meaningful to me.
Wonderful.
So
I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a gem. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you, Chris.
All righty. Well, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Blessings to your family.
All right. Thanks. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, okay, Chris Pollard, let's go. What an open discussion. What an amazing experience he had in terms of being in combat situations in Iraq and getting that full picture of different ways of living, right? The idea that there's poverty that you would never experience here in the United States, uncertainty that you would never experience, and a loss of understanding of why they were there, a real befuddlement as to the strategy of their operations, leading also to a question of faith. Like I said at the very beginning in the intro, Chris didn't have a crisis of faith. He just had a question of faith, right? Kind of like the Santa Claus question. Do you believe in Santa Claus or do you believe it in the spirit of Christmas? Is there a difference? Why does it matter? These are all great questions to ask. And he asked them, especially after that experience, especially after he was kind of ready to be a chaplain. And so I love the fact that he went through his own questioning. So what did I learn from Chris? I learned that questioning faith is an excellent exercise because it gets you to the heart of what you believe and why you believe it and what you want to believe. and why you want to believe that. Those are the best questions to ask, I think. And it's also given him wisdom in terms of looking at his clients in the full arc of how they try to manage their own finances. What a wonderful man. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the show, please tell somebody. Let somebody else know that you enjoyed the show. Pass the word so we can get this to grow. And of course, you can always be on my show at menfolkjourneys.com. Thank you so much for listening. Word bid Falarid.